Welcome to another episode of Kookievision. In this video, I'm going to be making Luigi. So I've got a sugar cookie here in the shape of Luigi's face, and I'm using my projector to project an image of Luigi onto the cookie. And if you don't have a projector, you could always use a stencil that you make from paper. Just trace it onto some paper and then cut out the pieces and then trace them onto the cookie. And I'm using a food pen for this. You could also use your scribe tool to scrape it into the surface, but I find that a food pen works really well for this. And I'm basically blocking out some of the major details, so his mustache, his eyes, his hat and his sideburns, as well as that little logo on his hat. And another option would be to draw this on freehand. If you're just doing a few cookies, it's not a huge deal if you're very drawing inclined. But yeah, otherwise a projector works, especially when you're doing a lot of cookies. And so next I'm going to start flooding the background of the cookie. So I'm going to start out with his flesh first. So I'm outlining the ears here, and I've got a number 2 tip in a piping bag that's filled with a piping consistency ivory color. So I'm going around and tracing all of the details on his face that require this color. So basically everything on his face. And then I'm going to be filling it in with the same color that I have in a squeeze bottle, and at this time it's in a flooding consistency. Now, one thing to keep in mind when you're flooding very intricate cookies like this is to use a flooding consistency that is a bit more thicker than usual, so that you can actually go around and fill in all of these very finicky sections without it going over into the little sections that you don't want any of that color in. So sometimes you'll be doing like a square cookie or a round cookie, and it's just a lot of flooding, very basic flooding. You can sometimes get away with using a very runny consistency, but in this case you definitely want to make sure that your flooding consistency isn't too thin, or it's going to basically go over all those fine lines that you just did into all of the sections that you don't want that color in. So just keep that in mind. Nice thick flooding consistency here. And after that's crusted over just a few minutes, maybe 10-20 minutes or so, you want to flood in those eyes, and I'm using a flooding consistency white royal icing here, and I just used my scribe tool to get all that icing towards those little corners. And I've also let that crust over again, and I'm going to outline all of the sections with his hair. So this is a piping consistency black roll icing that I have fitted with a number 2 tip, and I just outlined all those little sections, and I'm filling it in with a flooding consistency of the same color, so black, into these sections. And again, I'm using a more thicker flooding consistency for this, just to have a little bit more control over where it goes. And for tiny sections like this, I really like to use a squeeze bottle that's been fitted with a coupler tip. Sweet Sugar Bell makes these, and they work really well. You can fit them with a very small tip, as opposed to regular squeeze bottles that the tip's kind of broad. So yeah, if you have any tiny sections there, a squeeze bottle fitted with a coupler works really well for that. You can put on a number 1 or number 2 tip to really get into those tiny little sections. Otherwise, a regular squeeze bottle works just fine. And I'm going to outline his hat this time. This is a number 2 tip with a piping consistency green royal icing, and I'm filling it in with the same color that I have here in a squeeze bottle, this time in a flooding consistency. And again, just use your scribe tool when needed to get all that icing towards the edges where you want it, and to get rid of any air bubbles if necessary. And I'm going to leave that green to crust over again for 10 to 20 minutes or so, and I'm going to flood in the final space here the part where his little logo on his hat goes. This is a white flooding consistency, so the same as the eyes, and I'll use my scribe tool to get rid of any air bubbles as well. And last but not least, I want to give him a little bit of extra dimension on his face. So the part of your face that sticks out the most is definitely your nose. So we're going to outline his nose with a ivory color piping consistency royal icing with a number 2 tip. And I'm going to flood it in with the same color this time in a flooding consistency. Really build that up and get a nice round nose. And again, you want to use a nice thick flooding consistency so you get a nice dome on there. And again, that nice thick consistency makes sure that that icing's not going to run over onto any of your other details. And I've let this crust over completely. You want it nice and dry because you are going to be drawing on it. So I've let mine dry overnight. And I've got a blue food pen here. I'm outlining the irises of his eyes, and I'm going to fill them in as well with the same color. Now, if you don't have a food pen, you can always use a touch of vodka mixed with your food gel dye, and then just use a fine brush to paint on the details. I'm also going to do the same thing here with a black food pen. I'm going to fill in the pupils, and you want to make sure you give him a little bit of shine in the top of his eyes too. So when you draw on the pupils, draw a little circle in the top and then just leave it white. That'll give him a little extra sparkle, a little bit of life in his eyes, and it'll make it look a lot more very cartoony. And for the L on his hat, I'm using a piping consistency green again. This is a number 1 tip since it's so small. You could also use a green food pen or again the vodka mixed with a little bit of green food gel for this step as well. And for some of the finer details on his face, I'm just going to use a food pen for this. So I've got my black food pen, and I'm drawing in the insides of his ears, as well as his mouth and that little divot on his chin. And to really pull everything together, I'm going to give him a nice bold black outline. So this is a piping consistency black royal icing that I have fitted with a number 1 tip. And I'm going around and outlining every single detail on his face. I really like doing this for especially cartoon characters. It makes them look extra cartoony, and it really pulls it all together and really makes it look great. And don't forget to outline the brim of his hat and his eyebrows. And the only thing I'm not going to outline here is the L on that logo. It looks fine just the way it is. And last but not least, you don't want to forget to outline that big old nose of his. And there we go, we've got Luigi from the Mario games. And if you look at the rest of my gallery, I also have a video on how to make Mario's face. So thanks for watching, guys. Be sure to like me on Facebook and on Instagram. Bye!